What I'm going to tell you is wrong, and what I want you to tell me is where I am wrong. We're going to build a training system together. Longevity Specific Training, LST. It's a biomedical approach to exercising that targets what reduces mortality, adverse health outcomes, and functional decline. Here is what's going to happen. I'm going to write one section of this training system. You are going to tell me in the comments what I'm wrong about. Then I either rewrite the section or move on to the following section. Every section contains one important design decision. Who's this for? If your primary purpose with exercising is to maximize your health and longevity, then this is for you. The naming choice of longevity specific training is a tribute to Brian Hickok's hypertrophy specific training from the year 2000. Back in the day, the popular belief was, let's call it bro science. Arnold Schwarzenegger and his friends have figured out how to grow your muscles, of course with resistance training, but science was starting to catch up. People like Brian or Lyle McDonald were going against the popular belief by trying to apply principles science have just figured out. So such system was HST, hypertrophy specific training. With longevity specific training, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to apply scientific principles to the practical realities of a new breed of sportsmen, which are longevity athletes. There is a difference between HST and LST. Of course, HST is for hypertrophy, LST is for longevity. But the problem is that HST already had a good idea that how you're going to grow muscle is by doing resistance training, and it started from there. Now, LST has to take a step back, and in fact, will end where we figure out what exactly do we have to do for longevity. Unlike HST, which went into the minute details of how many reps and sets and what weights you should use, LST is not going to do that. The goal of LST is to figure out what combinations of exercises are optimal for the goal of longevity. The very first design decision that we have to make is that what approach are we going to take to reach the goal of longevity with exercise? And my proposal here is to take the biomedical approach. This is what this video is about. I'm going to go through all the alternative approaches that we could take and argue for the biomedical approach. You might tell me if I missed an approach or if I'm wrong about something, and maybe we should take the spiritual route here. The first approach is the anecdotal approach. Now, as alluded before, this is one of the least reliable way to get us to the truth. It must be noted that it matters whose experience we're talking about, because if you're talking about you're experiencing something that is different from what a scientific study says, then your experience might enjoy priority over the scientific study for yourself. The next is the intuitive approach. Just wing it, man. Different people have conflicting different intuitions. This is a common occurrence. Therefore, we cannot build a reliable system based on intuitions. The next one is the quantified self approach. Now, this is really interesting because quantifying a bunch of things about yourself and then making decisions on what interventions you're going to do is something that is clearly going to play a big part in our future as we become more able to measure more things and more conveniently. What's the thing here? Why aren't we choosing this one? Well, it fails in its scope. So the scope of quantified self approach, notice it works really well if you have an exercise program, right? And then you do your little measurement of your heart rate, and based on that you are always adjusting, let's say, your treadmills, how fast your treadmill is going. Now this is great, but notice the scope is real small. So we kind of need something to arbitrate between exercises that is looking at population level averages, and that is biomedicine. Now, that's not to say we are not going to use the quantified self approach at all. We are going to have things like some conditionals. Let's say if you have high blood pressure, then we are going to recommend you isometric exercises because those are the best way to reduce your blood pressure. So we are going to have these conditionals, but we are not going to go full quantified self. Naturalistic, evolutionary, and ancestral approaches. Now look, if you're not going to eat processed foods, then your diet is going to be better than if you would have. Well, except if you take whey protein, because that's a ultra processed food, yet possibly the healthiest food in existence. But the naturalistic worldview cannot go there. Why? Because it paints with broad strokes. But we need to be more precise than, let's say, an evolutionary theory would be. So that's why we go with biomedicine instead. Psychological, gamified, and competitive approaches. Now, the thing about games and competitions, or even psychology, is that they need goals, and they are great at getting you achieve those goals. Psychology, game design, and competitions are a fuel, a motivation, what pushes you towards those goals. Now, what we are trying to do here is to figure out what the goals are in the first place. What exercise sets are we supposed to do for our longevity? Functionalist and skill-centric approaches. Look at what old people are having difficulty to do and practice those things. This is an interesting idea, but ultimately is incomplete. It doesn't factor in your blood pressure, right? But biomedicine does. Now, it doesn't mean we throw this out completely. It just means we are going to examine the functionalist and skill-centric approaches later on as training systems and not competing approaches. Pain avoidant approaches. Exercise so you don't feel pain. This suffers from the exact same problem that the functional approaches did. It's incomplete. We should examine specific rehabilitation and pain avoidant exercise systems in our exercise and training systems, and not as a competing, overarching approach. Hormetic and anti-fragile approaches. You stress a system and the system is going to adapt to that stress. This is too wide for us. What stress exactly, and what does adaptation even mean? Now, that is a matter for biomedicine, the minimalistic approach. This isn't really a competition here. I just wanted to put this in because there is something important that we should consider, which is that idea that for longevity, it's okay to be average in all metrics, but that's not the case because then you lose your buffer. So you don't want okay grip strength, because by the time your grip strength start to go down, it's going to be much sooner than if you would have excellent grip strength instead. Random approaches, they are just a joke. Aesthetic approaches, what looks better works better. It is true, but only if all other things are equal. Now, what biomedicine does, and it should consider, or our biomedical approach should consider the aesthetics as well, but also all other things. Those have to be equal for that. Holistic approach. We have a definitional problem here because holistic tends to stand for I haven't defined my goals. It could also stand for that you treat your body as a holistic system. If it stands for that, then LST is already holistic, but with numbers. But if it just means vibes, then it's not for us. Ecological and environmentalist approaches. Let's define the scope here. This project shall not escalate to the environmental and ecological impact of this training system. I don't know how it would, but you're the internet. You always find a way. Spiritual, ritualistic, and religious approaches. Now, it is known that they are great for your meaning, but are they good for your mortality curves? Not so much. Even if you believe that the yogis have achieved hundreds of years of lifespan, you can still not reliably reproduce that. And until we find a reliable way to reproduce that lifespan with some kind of religious practice, we should stick with other approaches. Post-human preparation approach. It's possible that something is going to happen in the future, right? That changes everything. But we don't know what and when. If something happens, then we might rewrite this entire documentation to include extreme cold training because the world is freezing over, something like that. A very similar argument can be made to military and tactical fitness approach. So, of course, we could exercise for bad times, but again, we have to narrow the scope here. We assume that we are going to live in a civilized world while we are doing this exercise, and hopefully never have to protect ourselves from a knife attacker. Well, that was it, guys. I hope we succeeded to agree on the biomedical approach, and we can move on to the next session with the fleshing out what the goals of this system should exactly be. But please contribute with your comments, and let's build a glorious system together.